Hello, and welcome to the second recording of The Path of Self Knowledge. I'm grateful that you are listening to this. My friend Tammy asked me to talk about what brought me to start on the journey of self knowledge. And so, in this episode, I'll be addressing that. Well, actually, what I could say is it was rather a combination of factors. It's like it was just in my destiny somehow. Just like Maharaj says, everything happens in its own time for its own reasons. So really, I cannot say I did anything particular that got me interested in this kind of stuff. But now, looking back, I can see some factors which really led me down this path. Excuse me. For one thing, my personality is it's just that I love reading. Since I was a small boy, I loved reading. I remember when I was growing up, those were the days when they used to use hard newspapers to wrap items at the shop. And so every time I was sent to the shop, I would spend most of the time, on my walk back home, reading, reading the wrapper, you know. So sometimes I could spend a lot of time and mom would get angry, but then I could not help it. My dad also had so many books from his college days. My dad is is a graduate of theological college, and so he kept so many books. He also had so many magazine subscriptions which were coming to him almost every other month. Most of them from America, actually, I remember. And I used to steal. I used to steal his books and read books that were actually way beyond my level of understanding. But assembly, assembly. I liked interacting with the books, and who can say why? I just don't know. I was thirsty for knowledge, maybe from my earliest years. And so, having been brought up in a Christian home, most of the stuff that I read from my dad was mostly theological books and Christian magazines, you know, besides the Bible, of course. And so that, looking back, that influenced me a lot. My thinking was very much influenced by, of course, what I read since I was I was a young man. Even today, I cannot go for a day without reading something. And of course, with the advent of the internet, there are so many books that I have access to. So I almost always have something to read. Then the in getting fascinated by self knowledge was pain. Pain and suffering really played a huge part in my desire to search for the cause of what I was going through. Most of my suffering was centered around my relationships. And so I remember I got introduced to the work of the late Morty Lefko. Morty Lefko did a lot of work on beliefs, core beliefs, the way they are formed in our early childhood, and how they influence uh, how we perceive ourselves and others and life in general. So I spent some considerable time uh, studying Mortis' work. And I think actually it is out of that I started making some connections between the happenings in my life and my belief systems. This was sometimes in 2010, 2011, 2012. I was very much invested in learning about how beliefs are formed and how they later come to influence uh, our interaction with life in general. So it was a very important turning point for me to actually discover how my early childhood experiences with my mom, because I was brought up by my mom after marriage to my dad uh, went south, and I was around, I think, 11 or 12, thereabouts, you know. And as I've said, most of my suffering came from the way I related with women. I wanted really to find out uh, what led me into those dark alleys, and or that the pattern that I noticed in my relationship with women. So when I started making some connections, after going through Mortis' work and his explanation about beliefs and self-concept and all that. When I first made the first few connections, then I saw the way I think about myself, the way I feel about women, my expectations, and stuff like that. Then I started getting some clues that there may be a connection between who I am on the inside and my life experience on the outside. And I can tell you it was such a huge relief for me. You know, the worst kind of suffering is the suffering that happens uh, without our awareness of why is it happening. When we go through a hard time, when we go through pain, especially emotional pain, and yet we cannot find it within ourselves, how we are connected to the pain, how there could be a cause of this pain inside of us, then that is the worst kind of suffering. But when we can suffer consciously in awareness, you know, like I know I'm going through this because of this and this, I can connect the cause in me, then it is no longer suffering, you know, or it is no longer painful as it is when we go through suffering without making any connections. So, from what I know now, I mean, the human mind is designed to make those connections between cause and effect. You know, that's what you call logic. A leads to B, or B leads to C. And when that connection is not there in our conscious awareness, then life becomes really hard. Life becomes unbearably painful, especially when you go through pain that you don't understand. And also, I mean, even when you go through the good times, because you cannot make the connection between why am I going through this? Is it just something which is passing and then I go back to my pain? If you cannot make that connection also, uh, it becomes, even the good times can also become a big source of anxiety and suffering. So until we're able to make the connections, then we suffer, we really do suffer. So there are those factors, the inner factors and the outer factors. The way I see it now is like there must be a meeting of both. At one point, inner growth, there must be a connection. There must be a point at which we make the connection between what is happening from outside and what is connection with that with what is happening on the inside. Something must happen to precipitate that kind of connection, and that becomes the turning point uh, from unconscious living now to conscious living. It may happen different ways for different people. It's like what people in psychology call haha moments. A haha moment is when we make that discovery between the inner cause and the outer cause. So before then, um, our life is just one continuous um, story without any rhyme or reason. We cannot see the pattern. We cannot see the pattern of our lives. We cannot connect the dots. But then when it comes to that turning point, then we can start connecting the dots, and then we can now start understanding ourselves at a deeper level. And that brings some sort of security because now we can understand our past, the way it happened, and why it happened. You see, there are two perspectives from which you can tell our life story. One is before awareness, and the other perspective is after awareness. Before awareness, everything is just haphazard, and our story owns us. The story of our life owns us. We are not in charge of the story. So we are more of victims of our life story because it happens without our conscious contribution, without understanding how did I bring this about. But then, after I start making the first connections between the inner causes and the outer effects, then slowly by slowly, we start owning the story. We start making the connections, we start seeing the patterns, and then now we start getting in charge of the story of our life. For many people, it is still unconscious. It is still unconscious. They are still victims of their life. That's why many people live in the past. They cannot make a break until they become conscious of the inner causes of their outer life experience. So that's a good place to start to understand. To understand. I mean, I would say it is actually by the grace of God, when that point comes, just like the Damascus Road experience for Saul before he became Paul. We really can't say. We really can't say uh, when and where it happens. But on the road of our development, it must happen at one time. And that becomes now the turning point from unconscious uh, seeking of our truth and then conscious striving for the truth. But without making that first connection, at least a few connections between our life story and our inner life, then we cannot make any progress. So thank you so much for listening. In the next episode, I'll talk about The major life milestones that I've gone through since that first awakening. And I'll start by discussing how my ego came to get crystallized. Thank you so much and see you in the next episode. Bye.